25-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos and his father, Adrian Conejo Arias, after they were detained by immigration officers during a Minnesota raid, sparking nationwide outrage. The boy was among 4 students taken into custody earlier this month in the Minneapolis suburb of Columbia Heights. U.S. District Judge Fred Barry sharply criticized the federal government's immigration enforcement, calling the actions traumatizing and driven by deportation quotas rather than proper legal process. The Ecuadorian father and son who entered the United States illegally as asylum seekers were held at a family detention facility in Dilley, Texas, before the judge's order requiring their release by Tuesday. I now invite Professor David K. Johnston, author and journalist from New York, in this discussion. Professor Johnston, thanks very much for joining us. Well, it's good news, welcome news that at least the father and minor son duo have been released. But clearly it's taken 2 American citizens' lives for this really to, for it to set a precedent and for their release to really happen. It's, I think, something that has shaken not just the United States, the entire world, and now we're seeing some progress in the methods of ICE. But what I would like to ask you, why do you think Minnesota is being the center of these ICE, increased ICE actions?
Kriti, I think there are 2 principal reasons that Donald Trump sent his goons to Minneapolis. The first is that he lost the state. And across America, it is in states that voted for the other candidate in 2020 and 2024 that Trump has focused the really aggressive tactics like grabbing a 5-year-old boy, in one case in Chicago, zip tying, that's a kind of plastic handcuff, a boy so small he was in diapers. The second reason is the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. And Chauvin is serving a long prison sentence along with the 4 other officers who were involved. And Trump was livid about that case. He believes Chauvin should not have been charged, despite putting his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, which is the cause of his death. This is Donald taking out revenge and retribution against people who he doesn't like, whose voting he doesn't like.
Now, Professor Johnston, you've of course known Donald Trump for many years and very closely. Donald Trump has not historically had very good relationships with mayors of different cities. He's also now speaking against the Minneapolis mayor, Minnesota governor. Anybody that really does not follow Trump's line of thoughts is basically met with aggression. Do you think some tinkering can be done there?
No, I mean, Donald is who Donald is. Leopards don't change their spots. And Donald was, for example, a very courting of the corrupt mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, and had leverage over him through a federal case accusing him of corruption that he could pursue or not pursue, depending on whether Mayor Adams, who's now out of office, would do what he wanted. And we've seen this around the country, and these are similar to the tactics Trump used during his career, leveraging people, paying for negative information on people and threatening to disclose it publicly or to a spouse to obtain advantages in deals. And that's all we're seeing here is a continuation of his lifelong practices, which have nothing to do with law enforcement, proper law enforcement, or his promise that he was going to have immigration agents go after the worst of the worst, rapists, murderers, drug dealers, at the same time that he has been granting pardons to some of the biggest drug traffickers and drug financiers in the world, and to a number of sexual predators, including one he gave a pardon to on Friday.
Right, Professor, finally, what really is the ground situation in Minnesota right now? How are protests taking place, and what kind of How is the police and authorities really reacting to protesters there?
Well, the protests are continuing. People in Minnesota are used to being out in 0-degree weather, and if anything, they have grown larger in the past few days. There's a new incident that's come about where a woman who was following ICE officers to find out where they were going was suddenly stopped on a road. Guns were drawn. She was threatened with being shot. And the local police chief was the one who got her freed and took her home. So the tactics, these very aggressive tactics that are just not those of professional law enforcement, something I've studied and written a great deal about. They are not being pulled back in any significant way. ICE is also going after journalists now.
Yeah.
And going after people with cell phones, because the reason there was so much upset over the 5-year-old boy, Liam Conejo, is because of those cell phones. And this goes to Gandhi's great lesson about provocative but peaceful resistance. And that is, there's something in the human heart that when you see unnecessary and pointless brutality and cruelty, it affects large numbers of people and gets them to begin questioning the legitimacy and the conduct of government.
Right. Professor, this of course is a subject of longer discussion, but for now that's all the time that I have. Thanks for joining us, and we move on. Viewers, San Francisco streets are filled with car horns and chants on Saturday as demonstrators rallied against U.S. President Donald Trump and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, decrying federal immigration policies and demanding broader political accountability. Many held signs condemning ICE enforcement tactics while expanding their grievances to include criticism of public figures they linked to administrative policies. The San Francisco demonstration was part of a wave of anti-ICE protests taking place across the United States over the weekend. The rally occurred amid a social media post by President Donald Trump directing the Department of Homeland Security not to deploy in protest in Democratic-led cities unless local officials request federal assistance or federal property is threatened. Despite that, Trump affirmed that ICE and Border Patrol personnel would continue protecting federal buildings as demonstrations continue.
I am virulently opposed to the current administration. I think Trump is a monster. I can't believe anyone still believes that he's like good at anything, because he's nothing but a felon and a failure and a rapist and a pedophile and possibly a murderer. So yeah, of course I'm out here.
Well, every day there's something new. I mean, you think it's bad one day and then the next day it's worse. They're going after everything that makes this country great.
I hope what will happen is that more people will wake up. It's true that peaceful protests, nonviolent protests, is what brings down dictatorships. It was a huge sacrifice for that, but that's what we need to do, and people need to wake up to this.
In tech news, before we wrap up